I bet you didn't know these creepy facts that'll give you nightmares. Victorian England had a bunch of weird, strange fads. For example, tattoos were really popular, especially in Victorian women. Also, post-mortem photography was all the rage. In these pictures, when someone would pass, the live family members would pose with them for one final picture. They wanted it to look like the deceased was just sleeping, but unfortunately, they looked very dead. Speaking of Victorian people, they liked to wear jewelry made out of their deceased family members. They would incorporate teeth, hair, and bones in their jewelry. In the Catholic religion, purgatory is an immediate place where souls go, which is neither heaven or hell. But in Rome, there is a small museum that claims to have documentations of hauntings from people whose souls were stuck in purgatory, generally manifesting as a burn mark on the pages of a Bible and other objects. Bloodletting was an important part of any medieval doctor's practices. They'd have a choice of leeches or bloodletting. With the leeches, they would attach leeches to the sick person's body and allow them to suck out the sick blood. With bloodletting, they would cut open the person who was ill and just hope for the best, hoping they would bleed out the illness. In the 19th century, it was actually a pretty big issue to be buried alive. It happened a lot more often than you'd think. Sometimes they would mistake a coma for death, and they would bury someone and they'd still be alive. So they developed something called safety coffin. That way they could warn someone up above that they weren't exactly dead. Poveglia, Italy, is considered to be the most haunted island in the world. An untold number of people died on that island from a plague. They were quarantined there in the 18th century. In the 20th century, that island was then used as a mental asylum, and it currently lies abandoned and underdeveloped. Reportedly in the 1950s in Philadelphia, an object randomly fell from the sky. The police officers who were checking it out found sticky, odorless ooze leaking out of an unknown item, which potentially could have been purple, according to reports. But nothing bad happened, and apparently the object just dissolved. This news story was so weird that it actually inspired the movie The Blob. Just like dolls, ventriloquist dummies have become very popular in horror movies. If you really enjoy them, you can go to the Vin Haven Museum in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. It is filled with vintage ventriloquist dummies. In January of 2017, a 100-foot asteroid named AG-13 passed right by planet Earth. It was less than the distance of the moon. Scientists only realized that it was passing by 2 days prior. It almost hit Earth. Talk about a close call. There is something called the Devil's Bible. It's a legendary Latin manuscript. It's said to be the product of a monk's bargain with Satan. In the 13th century, a monk was about to be executed for his crimes, unless he could compose one simple, impressive work of art overnight. To achieve this impossible task, it's said the monk sold his soul to Satan and produced this 165-pound, 3-foot-long book. While that's just a legend, the Devil's Bible really does exist, and it appears to have been written by the hand of one single scribe. Hundreds of years ago, when people died on the battlefield or really just anywhere outside, they would just leave their bodies and let them rot. As they decomposed, their skulls would start to grow moss. People believed that this moss contained spiritual properties of the fallen soldier and would gather it to use as medicine. The moss that was found on the skull of someone who had been hanged, they said that was the most effective. There is a place in Indonesia where they don't immediately bury their dead. These people think of death as a process, and elaborate funerals can last months to even years after the person's death. During this process, the body of the deceased is wrapped in cloth and is thought to wander around the village until that person is eventually laid to rest. At Harvard University, there is a book that is bound with human skin. Back in the 1960s, the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland had real human bones. That's because creators at the time couldn't make a realistic looking skeleton. They thought they all looked very obviously fake. So until art progressed further, they used real human skeletons in the attraction. Joseph Merrick had a disorder that mutated his whole body. He was nicknamed the Elephant Man. he was put in a freak show. He most likely had Proteus syndrome, which causes an overgrowth of skin, bone, muscles, vessels, and/or tissues. People are still born with this today. The biggest tsunami ever recorded was 1,720 feet tall. It hit Alaska in 1958. Scientific evidence shows that another tsunami is likely to hit that exact same spot. Eventually, in 1934, a mountain slide dropped heavy rocks down into a lake in Norway. This rock slide caused a 203-foot tsunami. It ended up killing 40 people and injuring even more. In 1904, a boy named Robert Eugene owned a very strange doll, who he also named Robert. This doll is said to be haunted and aware of what's going on around him, and even responsible for multiple violent mishaps. This doll, Robert, inspired the movie Child's Play. Queen Elizabeth used to paint her face with lead, which was extremely corrosive and aging. It was noted that women who use this on their face seem to wither and age quite quickly. Not to mention lead is incredibly toxic. In the 1800s, people needed dentures just like they do today, but back then they used real human teeth to make their dentures, usually from fallen soldiers. So a lot of people take medication to cope with their depression, but some people react differently to antidepressants. Sometimes they'll completely eliminate someone's ability to feel love and compassion. After a stroke or some sorts of brain trauma, people can develop a disorder where they cannot see faces. They absolutely cannot recognize someone. It can be someone in their close family, a best friend. Many of them wouldn't even recognize themselves looking in the mirror. So there's Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. It's known for its frighteningly lifelike sculptures. What most people don't know, though, is how Madame Tussaud got her start. She would rush over to heads as they were falling after being lopped off by a guillotine. She used these heads to showcase her waxing process. In ancient England, people used the tops of hollowed out human skulls as cups and bowls, so they would literally eat and drink out of human skulls. In the Czech Republic, there is a church that is completely decorated with human bones. This happened because there was too many people in the cemetery. They were running out of room to bury people. And the church leaders claimed that if their bones became part of the church, that only meant they were closer to God. In 1973, two men were in a small submarine, 1,575 feet into the ocean. Suddenly, there was a malfunction, and water began flooding in, causing the submarine to sink. They only had enough oxygen left to survive for 3 days. It took so long for the rescue team to find them that by the time they extracted the crew, the men only had about 12 minutes of oxygen left. In Philadelphia, there's something called the Mutter Museum, and it's filled with bizarre bits of human anatomy. Mutations, tumors, medical anomalies, all are on full display. Rat kings are a thing, and they're not exactly what you're thinking they are. A rat king happens when multiple rats get entangled by their tails, and it just becomes this swarm of rat tails, fur, blood, and feces. In 2015, a woman began to have headaches. They discovered that she had a brain tumor, and when doctors removed it, they were shocked to find out it was a lump resembling skin that contained bone, teeth, and hair. It happens when cell tissue falls off of an embryo and moves somewhere that it shouldn't be. When the movie trailer for The Exorcist first aired, it was reportedly so scary that people started running out of the theaters. As a result, they decided to ban that version of the trailer. In the 1600s, alchemists came up with some pretty interesting elixirs. John French made an elixir containing human brains. He then left the mixture to sit inside of horse manure for 6 months. Had to wait for it to become liquid before they could drink it. In ancient Rome, they believed that if you drank fresh, warm blood of a fallen gladiator, you would obtain their strength. They also believed drinking blood cured epilepsy. The pacu fish that is native to South America, it has teeth that look just like humans in its mouth. From the 1982 horror movie Poltergeist, 4 of the actors randomly died. Because of this, people believe that there is such thing as a poltergeist curse. Everyone has tiny mites living in their eyelashes. A Japanese hornet is one of the largest and most venomous hornets in the entire world. A sting from it can cause you to go into kidney failure.